Okay, this is a response to Together for Peace's video entitled Part 2, The Bible as Evidence, which was a response to my The Bible as History video, which was a response to an earlier video of his, all this procedural history. As ever, there are links to the relevant videos to the right of the screen. Now, Together for Peace had a lot to say in his response, so to keep my response clear, I'm organizing it around 9 points. If I'm really ambitious, I'll put an outline in the description box at the end of this. No time to waste. Off we go. First point, Together for Peace and Galatians. Together for Peace says that in his original video, he used, quote, historical aspects, unquote, from Paul's letter to the Galatians, and he expresses disappointment that I didn't spend more time talking about Galatians in my response. Now, I thought I did address what seemed most significant about his comments on Galatians. It's also worth noting that the title of his video was The Bible as Evidence, and Together for Peace opined that various biblical texts could be used as historical evidence of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. In light of this, my discussion of the Gospels seemed relevant. However, since it's clear that Together for Peace wants more attention paid to the, quote, historical aspects of Galatians, I am happy to oblige. It seems that the primary historical aspect of Galatians that Together for Peace found compelling is that Paul says he had a, quote, revelation of Jesus Christ, which eventually led him to the leaders of the early Christian church in Jerusalem. Together for Peace opines that this is, quote, amazing, that these two different groups of people, namely the leaders of the early Christian movement and Paul, end up having the same message. This, Together for Peace goes on to say, constitutes, quote, very strong evidence, unquote, by which he can say, quote, with certainty, unquote, that Jesus lived, was crucified, and was raised from the dead. I'll note parenthetically that Together for Peace continually says he can't prove any of this, but he also declares that he can say it, quote, with certainty. No doubt the fault is mine in not being able to discern the meaningful difference between claiming that one can say X with certainty and that one can prove X is true. So I'm not going to quibble about this. The question is whether the relevant portions of Galatians are in fact amazing, certainty-inspiring texts that constitute very strong evidence for the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. As an initial matter, I'll clear the field a bit. I don't dispute the existence of a person in history whom we've come to call Jesus of Nazareth, nor do I dispute that Jesus was executed by crucifixion, okay? So I'm focusing on the question of resurrection. That, it seems to me, is where the real controversy lies. In Romans 1:4, Paul says it was by his resurrection that Jesus was declared to be the Son of God. And in 1 Corinthians 15:14, Paul characterizes Jesus' resurrection as the sine qua non of the Christian faith. Without it, the faith is worthless. I agree with Paul, and it's not often I say that, so note it well. Together for Peace's claim that there were two separate groups of people who came together and amazingly found that they both had the same gospel message, withers under biblical scrutiny. Yes, in the first chapter of Galatians, Paul claims that he neither received nor was taught the gospel by any human being, but rather he, quote, received it by a revelation of Jesus Christ. A remarkable claim indeed. Does it ring true? No. Is it corroborated elsewhere in the Christian scriptures? No. Quite the opposite. It's contradicted. Paul notes in Galatians 1:13 and elsewhere, he used to, quote, persecute the church. Now, when we first meet Paul in the book of Acts, he's just listened to a lengthy exposition by the Christian deacon Stephen, and then Stephen is murdered, stoned to death. Acts goes on to put Paul at the center of a, quote, great persecution against the church, in which Paul is said to have been, quote, ravaging the church. Now, as a persecutor of Christians, Paul must have been hearing their message, the gospel that they were preaching. Second, almost immediately after Paul's dramatic experience on the road to Damascus, his, quote, heavenly vision, as he would later call it according to the book of Acts, Paul is in the company of Christians. First, he meets Ananias, who, according to Acts, Jesus sent to Paul. Ananias preaches the gospel to Paul, then Paul is baptized, and then Paul goes directly into the company of, quote, the disciples who were at Damascus, unquote, with whom he, quote, immediately begins to proclaim Jesus. Paul didn't receive the gospel from any human being? If that's true, then the author of Acts got the story horribly wrong. Because Acts has Paul getting the gospel message from a whole bunch of human beings. In sum, Together for Peace's claim that what Paul says in Galatians constitutes amazing, certainty-inspiring evidence ignores the fact that Paul's account significantly conflicts with another account of the same events elsewhere in the Christian scriptures, namely Acts of the Apostles. Now, whom do we believe here, Jack? Paul in Galatians or the author of Acts? It can't be both. At least one of them got it wrong. Second point, Galatians and the Gospels. In his response, Together for Peace notes that the Gospels constitute a, quote, different type of writing, unquote, from Galatians. True enough. So what? What is the significance of that? Are they less reliable? More reliable? And what is the significance of that claim, for true claim, for purposes of this discussion? Third point, the outlandish lie about Jesus. Here, Jack, I misunderstood you. I mistakenly believed that in your earlier video, the outlandish lie was meant to be a reference to Jesus' resurrection. In fact, you meant it as a reference to Jesus having existed at all, and my apologies for that misunderstanding. That said, as I've noted, I'm not disputing that Jesus existed and was executed on a Roman cross. In my book, the outlandish tale is that Jesus was raised from the dead, and it doesn't seem to me to be the least bit implausible that claims about Jesus' resurrection developed quite apart from most, if any, of the facts. As I noted in my earlier video, outlandish stories about Jesus were circulated and believed while he was alive, according to the Gospels. For example, that bit about people who believed he was John the Baptist raised from the dead. So it seems to me no surprise that outlandish stories continued to develop, circulate, and garner adherents after Jesus' death. Fourth point, inconsistencies among the Gospels and other texts in Christian scriptures. In his response, Together for Peace notes that the early church didn't have a problem with the fact that Matthew, Mark, and Luke's Gospels were inconsistent with one another. With full knowledge of the inconsistencies, they included each of these texts in the canon. Moreover, Together for Peace notes that it's no secret or mystery that the Gospels are inconsistent. I'll take that second bit first. It's heartening to hear Together for Peace doing what so many of his fellow Christians absolutely refuse to do, namely acknowledge the fact that the Gospels are inconsistent with one another. You and I have no disagreement here, Jack. Rather, it's many of your fellow Christians who will disagree with you. Whenever I talk about the inconsistencies among the Gospels, I get a deluge of text comments, private messages, and even video responses from Christians who insist that the Gospels don't disagree. In fact, some Christians have gone so far as to claim that if the Gospels or any biblical texts were inconsistent, they wouldn't be worthy of belief. I'll pick this up in part 3.